start really looking at these teams, they fight for their lives to stay into this tournament. And Fortified bolstering Necrotic Wake is not going to be any joke.
Yeah, this might be the most hostile combination of affixes and keystone level and dungeon that we have, just in terms of like random deaths across the group. 22 bolstering Fortified Quaking as we get underway. Both teams already getting started with some massive pulls here. Looks like Sheesh are going right into the Incinerator as our team name. Both teams also running a very similar comp here. We've got those Demon Hunters and Discipline Priests, kind of a Necrotic Wake special here from both teams.
Yeah, and both teams looking for a very big pull with Arcalath here, both committing the Bloodlust. They want to just get that underway here, and I don't blame them. This is a very scary pull on Fortified, and now it's over on the side of Sheesh, and they're going to be moving on. But, I mean, team name, they're not too far behind. Mikkel, they're just getting a little bit low, popping that cheat death, but that's okay. He's going to live to tell another tale, and they're going to be working on pulling in Blightbone here. And yeah, it's going to be a little bit slow here because no one really has any cooldowns available.
Yeah,
so they're just going to have to.
The Kyrian Goliath is the secret sauce here that does a lot of extra work here, right? Those Anima Exhaust really makes this trash a lot less deadly when you're fighting it with Blightbone, and makes Blightbone itself just a lot quicker to die. It's also providing a solid amount of HPS onto the group here, as you can see. So the player's health bar is not under too much attack, even though it is a pretty scary boss fight otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're even, like, I don't know where they're going to be looking to commit some of these weapons. Because they've got the Goliath buff here, I don't think you really want to bother committing a spear. You want to save that for something a little bit juicier, maybe later on in the dungeon, or perhaps even pull in some trash in a bit and then use this. Yeah, so they're going to, this is what I was going to go on to say, they're going to pull in this trash and then potentially use the spear here. Because if that spear does connect with that trash between the trash and the boss, then it will do damage to the trash as well. But I don't know if they even need it, actually. They might just kill it just old school style. They still have managed to pump out a lot of damage with that glide buff, which should be dissipating shortly. And team name, again, really not too far behind. They've got 30% left on the boss. They're within 10-15 seconds of one another in terms of actual just dungeon time. So this is starting out as a very, very close race between these two teams. And
Mikkel goes down on the side of team name. That is going to be, so they do have a battle res available, but they don't have anybody who can really effectively cast it from range. They would need to get into melee range for an engineering res, and with those silency puddles that the boss does, there's actually just no way to make that happen. They are going to be able to kill the boss here, but yeah, they're now a solid 30, maybe 45 seconds behind Sheesh, who are already getting started with this massive pull into the mini-boss, using the next set of Kyrian Goliath orbs, plus perhaps, yeah, you can see on the damage meters there, Andy does have the depleted Anima orb that's picked up off the ground, being committed for this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to see Team Nim here setting up for a very big pull, probably very similar in nature to that of Shishia. So it looks like the overall strats of the two teams look very, very similar at the time, the current time. So we'll have to see if there is any deviation at any point, or what. Maybe they've been watching each other's streams, maybe they've been in each other's DMs and been saying, hey, what route have you got going on tomorrow? Because mind if I copy? And they're like, yeah, sure, just change it a little bit so the teacher knows we didn't cheat.
So Curry now is down for team name as well, so that's going to be another player on the floor for them. They're going to just have to res after the pull is over. This is going to add even more time to team name, who also were doing a less ambitious pull than Sheesh were. Looks like they are on the plan here of skipping this mini-boss entirely. You actually don't need to do too much work to skip this mini-boss if you have a priest in your group. They can cast a mind suit and you can basically just all sneak on by around the side without having to commit anything like invis pots or shrouds. And so team name are now going to get over onto this next Kyrian Goliath, the third and final one of the dungeon. But look at what Sheesh are up to here. A massive pull, plus that huge skeletal monstrosity is involved in this one as well. That's one we don't normally recommend on the live servers, although, with all the buffs here, look at that thing getting bolstered. Oh, this is scary.
Yeah, luckily it just was at just a couple of percent health when it did get bolstered. It did grow quite substantially in size, but luckily they still managed to knock it over. and now they're going to be looking to commit the Shroud here. They're going to be going just straight up to the boss and potentially going for Varith here to get that additional anima power, but they might even look to then spear through it as well.
Yeah, that's a cool piece of technology that you have in this dungeon with the Tormented Affix, is just shooting a spear directly through the Tormented mob into the boss. You know, you hit both. Usually you want your tank to be the one who presses that button so that they get the threat of both, but you know, if you have a DPS player do it, as long as the tank can rapidly taunt, then that can work out for you. Still a little bit scary. It doesn't look like it's going to be a strategy that Sheesh is deploying here, though. Actually, no, it is exactly something they're doing here. Look at the damage meters. They have had their mage. That's not regular combustion. That is a spear. You can see the combustion being popped now, so definitely something that saves you a bit of time. It also applies a damage taken increase for the duration of the bleed, which can make everybody's cooldowns a little bit more effective on that initial burn as well. Quakes are something that need to be dealt with here too. That affix, not the most impactful of the ones we have in the dungeon, but definitely one that can cause a problem, especially as you can see everybody's kind of trying to grab their anima power in the middle of a fight, which is a scary time to try and do that, especially on this one. You get hit by one of those necrotic brats right mid-fight. Team Name here have done a good job of catching up. They're about 50% of a boss health pool, only on Fortified as well, so they're definitely in range. But that is how far they are behind Sheesh, plus those 10 seconds of death differential.
Yeah, absolutely. We you know, Team Name here, they're slightly behind compared to Sheesh, so if they've got that death differential as well on top, then that could just, maybe just end their run here in Necrotic Wake a little bit. You know, could just diminish how strong that they've really been going here in the run so far, and it could just give Sheesh that advantage where it can afford them a couple seconds to make a few mistakes or potentially just do things a little bit slower and still be okay.
Yeah, that's the kind of buffer that you need. But it's still, I mean, this is not a one, you know, there's no safety here in terms of wipes. If Sheesh were to have something go horribly wrong, especially in this dungeon, this is a dungeon where the weapons, the way that they work, if you commit those resources and then wipe anyways, you are just so far behind the rest of the time because you're just there without that resource when you then try and pull again. And usually that means you have to make a less ambitious pull, or you have to fight a boss for way longer. That's what you want to avoid if at all possible. You can see here Team Name are going to be getting a markdown. They have the boss about 10% health, and we can look at the very bottom of the screen. You can see the boss splits here. So Team Name lost about 30 seconds in the first boss split, and it looks like this second boss split is going to cost them another 30 or so. So they are about 1 minute behind, plus those 2 deaths of death differential, adding up to a clean total of about 70 seconds.
Oh yeah. I mean, they're, again, doing a great job. I think it's kind of important to mention, I don't know if you guys have already talked about this because I've been over in the replay labs, but these teams were kind of given the perfect blueprint on how to do this dungeon yesterday, but as we speak, Andy just goes down. They might be able to kite this out with a little bit of nice kiting. They have the slows from the Fire Mage. It's only a 20% slow, but it might be enough for him to hop on an Angel and get back up. It's going to be really scary, but those mobs are so low, and they do have a Flesh Crafter alive. What are they going to do?
Nezro's also been limited as a Stanner. Yeah, so they're going to keep kiting around here for a little bit, but this is so scary. Do you know what's actually interesting? The Flesh Crafter's Cleaver does not scale with bolstering, so you can actually still tank it as a tank player or somebody with the DR when it's bolstered. But it's still going to kill most people because it just kills most people even when it's not bolstered. It looks like they're just going to keep in-capping it and CCing it on its casts and try and catch up that way. But I mean, this is a huge opening for Team Name here because Team Name have taken out a bunch of trash here without having those wipes as well. They are now over onto the right-hand side of the room, and I think both of our teams here are basically at the exact same position in the dungeon now. In fact, I think Team Name is even slightly in the lead.
That is almost certainly the case here, especially with the extra deaths on the board. This is really unfortunate for Sheesh, and as a result of all of that, they did lose pretty much all of their cheat deaths as well. Now, important to note, they didn't use any of their battle reses there, so they're going to have 2 of them available in the coming seconds here. They didn't lose any value there, but losing all those cheat deaths, especially when these last couple of bosses and these last trash packs can be so dangerous, that is a big deal. And as you can see now, Team Name has taken the lead on the trash count, like you mentioned. That was just a disastrous pull for them.
Yeah, Team Name certainly in the lead here, but it's all going to come down to how well executed these 3 Gauntlet trash packs and then these last 2 bosses are. Both teams are going to avoid Sagadon here entirely, but actually, you know, this double assistant pull that Team Name is on right now, it can be pretty sketchy, and if you do this, you know, if you get a combination of abilities that's particularly challenging and you handle it poorly, it can be really bad. But as I speak, even over on the side of Sheesh, who aren't on that part yet, we have another death on the board. It's going to be Splat going down, going to have to release and run back. That's an extra, 5 seconds of death timer, plus slowing down the pull even further. Team Name getting a huge lead here as we enter the final little minutes of the dungeon.
Oh yeah, but I mean, we've seen this so many times. These last 2 bosses can go so horribly wrong. It's not by any means over just yet. There can be lots of things going wrong. You can even see some teams maybe miss their spear, like we've seen maybe in the Great Push. So, got to make sure none of that happens. But yeah, Team Name has definitely opened up pretty much an entire trash pack of lead right now. You can see they've already dealt with the 2 assistants that have only just now spawned for Sheesh here.
And tragedy for Sheesh here, both assistants targeted the same person on pull there.
Man.
That is a DPS loss. What happens when you do that? You have to have your tank soak one of them and have the other just hit one assistant. But that is going to slow down this pack further as we actually have, good job by them of lining up that throw cleaver and at least helping equalize a little bit. And they're going to actually un-CC the Flesh Crafter to get some extra cleavers thrown into the mix here. That will speed things up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you can see Gore Grind is already almost dead for Team Name. So they are making quick work of these Gauntlet packs.
Oh, Thanos going to have to do some trigonometry here. Did he get that throw flash onto it? I think he did.
Calculating trajectory. Hold.
All right.
Oh, wow.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
Oh, well done from Sheesh. But, I mean, they can't really afford to miss any of those at this point because they're already behind, like we've mentioned. And the gap is just widening. Having both of those throw flashes gone to the same person is such a big deal. I mean, I almost feel like you should just Shadow Melt the cast, right? So that it re-targets 2 different people, hopefully, so you have a better chance of getting more damage out. Because that's just such a huge damage loss to not deal with them every single time.
I hadn't even considered that was a possibility. Yeah, just Alliance things. Banner here, gonna pop the Boon of the Ascended, trying to catch up here on Gorgrind. You can see Gorgrind at basically the same health for Sheesh as Rotspew is for Team Name. So yeah, exactly 1 full pack, plus those 15 seconds of death differential is what's gonna separate these 2 teams here. These last 2 bosses, I don't think there's enough time for, like, good, clean play to make up that gap. I think at this point, Sheesh are relying on something going wrong for Team Name. But like you said, these 2 bosses, the way they operate, the way that the weapons have to be used on them, certainly are candidates where that could happen. Team Name are going to waste no time here, though. They're going to get straight into the boss fight. Let's see if they're going to be able to make this happen. It's going to be important. They get as much damage onto this boss as possible, and they land all of these hooks. That is the vital part.
Well, it also looks like Sheesh has miscounted their dungeon, too, or they have this strategy on purpose, because they're at the 98% trash right now. Rotspew is going to give them the last percentage, right? I believe it will. It gives 1.3%, so maybe they just don't want to kill this Flesh Crafter at the end. Maybe they're not going to cleave that down. Maybe that's their strategy.
That's probably what's going to happen, right? Is they're just not cleaving the Flesh Crafter, whereas Team Name are planning to cleave down the Flesh Crafter with the last boss. As you can see right now, they are landing those cleavers into Stitch Flesh to just try and help speed up the fight a little bit. They are putting some damage into the Flesh Crafter. Of course, they want it to stay alive to the last boss fight, though, because it is coming with them. They are going to snap it upstairs with them to help deal a little bit extra damage to the last boss. Wow, look at the trigonometry that they need to do here. A degree in vector calculus required for plus 22 Necrotic Wake in the MDI, as these 3 mobs each need to land their abilities on Sturge and Stitch Flesh. You can see Lepan here doing a great job of maneuvering around. Oh no! So the Flesh Crafter actually soaked the meat hook there, which means Stitch Flesh's Morbid Fixation cast has gone off. And I think that caused some problems there for a little bit, but very little time cost. Just a little bit of a heart attack there.
Little bit of a scary moment there, but everything's going to be okay. No battle res used either. All of their cooldowns are available. They still have one spear and a couple hammers left over for this boss as well. Really, the big time saver here is going to be how quickly they can get that Flesh Crafter up. Looks like they haven't opted to try to get up right away. They're just going to pull the boss instantly and use those weapons to try to go for as much burst damage as possible. Hopefully that Flesh Crafter comes up pretty soon, though, because they're going to want to start cleaving it at some point. And there it is. There's the snap. It's already at half HP as well, so it's going to be very easy to cleave down passively over time, probably just from the GG procs from the month alone. And they're well in position to take a lead over Sheesh here.
Oh no, Lupan gets hit by one of those Comet Storm projectiles. That means he won't be eligible for the achievement when the boss dies. A bit of a sad moment for him. Not to come back and pick that up in another run. There's that Throw Cleaver coming in. Watch the boss's health bar here. You can see just getting a nice little 2% chunk every time those Flesh Crafters connect. You know, it adds up over time. This boss has a lot of health, and those Flesh Crafters can also help just delete one of those big shields on the boss instantly and save a lot of damage on the entire group.
Mm-hmm. And Sheesh has now finally gotten to the boss. They even got the instant Flesh Crafter snap as well, which is some pretty nice tech, but it's going to be too little too late because Team Name not only has the boss below 10% HP, but they also have the deaths advantage as well, so Sheesh would actually have to kill the boss 15 seconds before Team Name to have a chance at winning this dungeon, and that's just not going to be the case here, as Team Name uses that final cleaver to finish off the final boss and take a 1-0 lead over Sheesh.
There it is, Team Name taking the victory just shy of the 16-minute mark. Congratulations to those guys taking game number 1. And man, Necrotic Wake, I mean, we've talked about how fast this dungeon can go, and even with some extremely punishing affixes as well, Zyro, both teams are still just flying through.
Yeah, I mean, and I was saying this as I cut in there in the middle of that dungeon, these teams kind of had a perfect plan laid out by Perplexed yesterday in this dungeon. They had a very fast 15.5-minute run, so if these teams really wanted to get some efficient practice in, they could just go look at that run and try to copy it pretty much point for point, and it looks like that's what they tried to do, and Team Name came very close to recreating that. They went for just barely sub 16, pretty close to Perplexed, also just really impressive from them as well.
That's right. I mean, this is just that dungeon, like I was talking about right before we started. Necrotic Wake already is extremely volatile with the way that the pulls are so big and using the weapons. When you add in Fortified and Bolstering to the mix, just the odds of one of these pulls going wrong, even for the best teams in the world, is phenomenally high compared to most of the other dungeons we have. So very much something that I think, you know, as much as you'd say, yeah, you know, try and practice the dungeon more, I don't think you're ever going to fully remove that risk from this dungeon.
Yeah, especially when, you know, you just have so much to worry about in a dungeon like this, and the key levels at the peak for the competition as it stands at the moment. There's just a bunch of different stressors that these teams really have to worry about, and, you know, everybody really doing a great job adopting that priest tech that we've seen since probably, you know, middle of season 1 as well, to make sure they're making the most of those cleavers. So far I've been liking a lot of the class variety too we've been getting here, Drat. I think we have had like 4 different tanks, 3 different healers at least.
Well, we've seen Prot Warriors, we've seen Vengeance Demon Hunters. I don't know if we've seen the Guardian Druid yet, but if we haven't, it's definitely something I expect to see under the right circumstances.
We saw one Brewmaster.
Yeah, we saw a Brew, of course, Inspires. Yeah, so definitely a lot going on there. In the healer department, we've seen that Resto Shaman, we've seen the Discipline Priest, we've seen that Holy Paladin, and then, across the DPS, I mean, we've had Warlocks, we've had Mages, we've had Hunters, we've had multiple specs of Mages even. Of course, had Rogues. We've got the whole crew here. It's a great metagame we've got brewing here.
I've been a huge fan, I don't know about you, Zar, but I've been a crazy big fan of seeing all the subtlety rogues this time around, to be able to have that sort of like variety between, okay, this is a class that can do some AoE when it needs to do some AoE, but most importantly, it's just evening everything out so that you can grab a couple mobs in at the end of Blightborn or something like that and start evening out his HP while everybody else can just freely AoE, and it gives you that sort of freedom for those different specs. I mean, we saw like Dealer's Iaxa yesterday, for example. The rogue is just, I'm just going to single target, and that's all I'm going to do while everybody else can just straight AoE.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of the unsung heroes of the group in that aspect, right? They do literally no overall damage so that their group can do AoE damage, and they can just funnel pierce single target. I'm only going to hit Shuriken Storm and Eviscerate, guys. You guys do all the AoE you want. Let that Ashen Hollow carry. Let the Frost Mage do his thing with Blizzard and Frozen Orb, and it works out well. I mean, We already talked about it yesterday. That dealer Zayaxa, they killed that boss a minute faster than the other team just because they funneled all the most single target damage they possibly could. It's just such a great strategy, and it's really opening up a lot of strategies just because they don't have to worry about Prideful anymore. They can pull trash on top of bosses and let those funnel classes do their thing. And yeah, I think that's just a great adaptation we're seeing from pretty much all of our top teams in this tournament this season so far.
And not only we don't have to worry about Pride because it couldn't be pulled into other mobs or anything like that, we also have seen so many times where people are, sure, they're skipping some Tormentors as well, Dratnos, but a lot of times they're also able to grab mobs on top of these Tormentors. So I think we've kind of hit a nice balance of sorts where, yeah, it's going to make the pull a lot more difficult, but under the right circumstances, these players can do it.
Yeah, that's the thing about Tormented, right? Is it gives you a lot of ways where you can optionally make certain trash packs or the last boss harder, or you can just fight the Tormented all by itself, and even that is challenging enough on the live servers. But in the MDI, the teams are always going to find the hardest possible way that they can possibly manage to deal with these pulls, because anything else is slower, and slow is bad.
Yeah. Slow is bad, and you never like to have any sort of bad day. And so I know we're starting the day off a little bit rougher than you would have liked, but we're going to be working through the mic things, as of course we do have Plaguefall coming up next. Let's go like a little bit closer to the mic. Hang on, I believe there it is. Well, we're going to work through it, okay? Just like all these teams have had to work through Plaguefall coming up next. It's going to be, I think this one's a 19 as well.
Yeah.
Nice little respite from the 22s. Okay. Well, we'll get back to him when we can, of course. But Plaguefall coming up. We've seen some absolutely ridiculous pulls as well, Dratnos, in Plaguefall, even with Explosive. And it's always kind of important to note that, hey, Explosive has also been receiving some changes throughout this expansion.
Yeah, Explosive has become a lot less of a sponge in terms of health than it was in previous expansions. Back in Battle for Azeroth, you would basically need to commit, like, a few specific specs that could do a really good job of dealing a lot of damage in one global if you wanted to kill them instantly. Stuff like Outlaw Rogue was really prized for that at the time. In this expansion, explosives have instead been moved to this space where they're still really lethal if they explode, but basically one global from basically anybody is going to be enough to take them out if you can swap to them. In a dungeon like Plaguefall, they're still pretty threatening because there are a lot of large pulls, and there are actually quite a few pulls with enemies in combat with you, like 40 yards away from you, and that is a big moment where you can just get one of those stealth explosives that spawns that nobody really notices, and then it just explodes, and all of a sudden your group's at 20% health, and your healer's like, guys, please, somebody?
Team? Question mark?
Dude, hello?
Yeah. And it's always interesting, too, because last season, Zyra, we were seeing all the mages babysitting any of those fungal mancers, there we go, to be able to steal their buffs or anything. And so far, we haven't seen any of that to as great of an extent, of just dragging it along with them the entire dungeon. And, I can tell you as a healer, I would dread that on any explosive week.
Well, the other thing as well is we talked about this a tiny bit, like we barely touched on it during the Plaguefall we saw yesterday, but it might be a key too low kind of scenario where, yeah, you could keep that buff up, but also most of the packs should just die in a combust or just Frost Mage AoE in like 20 seconds anyways, so it's probably not worth it. If this were a 22 fortified Plaguefall, it might be a much more viable strategy to have them kind of babysit that fungal mantle through to like maybe the second boss, or maybe just through the entire dungeon, just flower power it the entire way through. So I don't know, probably not going to see that this week, but I mean, we saw Perplexed run a 12-minute Plaguefall yesterday. Not really sure it gets much faster than that.
Yeah, absolutely onto that one. And like you said, there is that interesting sort of dynamic with key levels, because what we're going to see here as these teams are getting themselves ready could just be drastically different than what Group B, Group C could possibly be preparing for, or might have to actually run up against here, as I do think we also started getting some of the selections for next weekend for these teams to practice. But right now, Sheesh is down 1 against Team Name. They could be dropped to the lower bracket if they lose this one. Let's see what these guys got in store as game number 2 gets underway.
And these are two very different comps that have a lot of, like, you basically have magic damage the comp and physical damage the comp are coming up against each other here. Look at Sheesh, right? They've got that Vengeance Demon Hunter applying the Chaos Brand debuff to everything, including this massive pull that they're undertaking. Nezro gonna go straight into his Bonesmith. Thaner going down as well. And all of Sheesh, I think, are in so much trouble in this huge AoE damage. They are gonna be able to kill off that giant. Wildly down to 10%. Splat going down as well for them. Splat indeed going splat, as we have Pod Tenders procced. Andy is eventually going to fall, and that pull is going to be a huge catastrophe for Sheesh. Team Name, on the other hand, have made a smaller pull work much more easily, and they are taking a huge reward here as they're getting right into the first boss with their physical damage comp instead. Wow, I was going into my bit about the two different comps, and then both teams just started with the most ambitious pulls in this dungeon, similar to what we saw Perplexed actually successfully execute yesterday.
I mean, Sheesh definitely went for a lot more. You can see they have more trash count than Team Name, even though Team Name, completed. Even though Sheesh didn't even complete their trash pull. That's just such a scary, dangerous pull, and I think that's one of the biggest problems with the Fire Mage. Even on a 19 fortified key level, yes, you can get your PI buffed combust off, but the trash isn't going to be dead at the end of it. You have to rely on the other 2 DPS to finish everything off. And while Affliction Lock and Shadow Priest definitely can do a lot of AoE burst damage, the problem with running a comp like a triple caster comp is that you don't have that many interrupts, you don't have that many stops to make sure things can't get cast off. It's pretty much all on your Vengeance Demon Hunter to take care of that. And once the Silence and Grip Sigil were gone, there wasn't a whole lot they could do to live through everything. And you could see one of those, I believe it was one of the Plague Storms from one of the mobs just completely trucked them. They just all started dipping down over time. And once your healer's down, you're pretty much dead in the water.
Yeah, one of the downsides of Sheesh's comp is, they have the Affliction Lock, they have the Shadow Priest. These are specs that deal a lot of damage, but they aren't specs with short cooldown interrupts or a bunch of easy ways to provide crowd control. They each have a couple of things in their kit that do that, but when you compare the total cooldowns of crowd control and interrupt effects on Sheesh's side compared to stuff like what the Rogue and the Monk are bringing on the side of Team Name, I mean, it is a night and day difference. It means that Sheesh have to be really careful to use their crowd control effects conscientiously and avoid overlapping them with each other, because they just don't have as much raw number of those resources. What they do have, though, is just huge amounts of magic damage, right? They have 3 heavy magic damage DPS all being buffed by Andy's Chaos Brand, whereas Team Name's side, all of their DPS are doing physical damage. They've got that Battle Shout from their Prot Warrior, and they've got the Mystic Touch from their Monk. So this is so cool, actually. I love the synergies that are built across these two different teams. This is kind of a work of art to me, the two different team comps we see in front of each other here.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't something we've seen in the MDI for a long time. 2 completely different comps, minus the healer, of course, that have their own different strengths and weaknesses based off of the synergies that they have. I would say, in my personal opinion, I think I like the physical damage comp more, not only because they have more tools for safety and interrupts. Sorry for hitting my mic there, by the way, probably blew your ears out. But also, just the idea of running with 3 Clothies in the group kind of scares me, because everyone knows how easily Clothies can die to any nasty physical damage. So having to heal 3 of those sounds like a terrible proposition to me as a healer, especially when you're trying to blast as much damage as possible and not heal as much as possible. But we'll see if it works out for them. It's going to be a tall order for them to claw themselves back in here. They're probably going to have to hope for a similar level of wipe out of Team Name in order to tie up this series.
Yeah, you can just look at those boss 1 splits. We can see 1.5 minutes plus the extra half minute of death differential. So a 2-minute advantage for Team Name. 2 minutes is the upper bound of kind of what a whole dungeon's worth of clean, good pulls can maybe make up. But I would say it's very much that upper bound. I think that it's absolutely a case where Sheesh is like, if they play great, they can maybe close this gap, but it would be phenomenal if they were going to be able to do that without something going actively wrong on the side of Team Name. It's definitely still possible, though. I mean, it is a long dungeon. There's still a lot left ahead of us here, and it's a hard dungeon, too.
Look at the poll that Sheesh are putting together now. These are the kind of polls that they're going to have to try to spec into, I guess, to opt into in order to come back into the dungeon. These giant polls, these double-sized polls, are what their comp is really going to lean into, right? Having your Combust up, having the Affliction Warlock with their cooldowns up, 2 classes doing 60, 70k DPS, that's going to help you out a lot. But they're going to have to put together probably 3 or 4 more of those in order to catch up.
Yeah, they're going to have to chain those together. You can see on count, though, they aren't far behind. Like you said, they did go a bit more aggressively at the start of the dungeon, which means they can skip some more stuff towards the end and maybe kind of accelerate right towards the end of the dungeon.
Yep, for sure. I mean, the other thing as well that they can definitely more safely do if they have the cooldowns available is do giant trash pulls into the bosses. I would love to see just like a triple trash pull plus maybe even the Tormentor after Dr. Ickis, all on top of Dr. Ickis, because they have the damage to pull that off. They might even consider just going for it because they know they're probably behind by a lot right now.
I want to call out one cool thing that the Tormented Affix is interacting with the regular affixes here, and that is, you can see that we've got Explosive going on, right? One thing that you may not be aware of is the Signet of Bolstering Anima power actually triggers off of Explosives dying as well. So all 6 DPS players in this match have chosen that Anima power. You don't really see that one selected outside of Bolstering Week, but when Bolstering is active, it is a very good selection for, especially as long as you're always pulling enough that you're getting a couple explosives spawning every couple seconds. It ends up being high uptime on a high damage buff. So a good little adaptation you can make for yourself on Bolstering Week is to pick that thing.
On Explosive Week.
Yes.
Not on Bolstering Week, yeah.
So, sorry,
bolster yourself
did
on
I say
Explosive
bolstering?
Week.
Yeah, bolster yourself on Explosive
That's
Week.
all right, though.
Don't
we all knew
explode
what
yourself on Bolstering Week, right? They're two very different plans.
Don't explode yourself on Bolstering Week. Well, it looks like Team Name have actually gone for that pull that I was mentioning, and they pulled it off cleanly. So even if Sheesh is able to pull that off, they really won't be gaining themselves that much time because Team Name is already pretty much through with Dr. Ickis. They will have this Plague Bomb explosion go off, but similar to what we saw yesterday, pretty much everyone in the group has tools to live it. You have Cloak of Shadows, you have Bubble, you have Turtle, your tank will live it on his own. Even your monk can just stack Karma and Diffuse to live through it. It's no big deal. They all live through that explosion quickly, and they can finish off this last 20% without worrying about that second Plague Bomb at all. Just great execution at a Team Name, and they're really kind of picking off where we saw them play yesterday. They were extremely clean yesterday. Their times weren't quite where we expected them to be, but the times definitely are there today. They're going crazy fast.
They are zooming through the dungeon as they've already locked in that boss 2 split, and yeah, this is a phenomenal job so far by Team Name. You can see they're making their way to that inner platform. Sheesh getting started though on the final boss platform, or the second to last boss platform, yeah. And now they're heading over to the boss jumping around for a little bit, and now heading to its final boss platform. I feel like they're going to be making up time on this boss split. I feel like they're going to be making up a sizable amount of time on this boss split compared to Team Name. The question is just whether they can overcome 2 full minutes worth of death differential or total differential between the teams. I don't think they're going to be quite on pace for that, right? I think they're going to make up 30 seconds on the boss 2 split, and if you kind of carry that forward and get another 30 seconds on the next 2 boss splits, they are still going to be behind when the timer stops at the end of this thing.
Yeah, and if you're Team Name right now and you're really paying attention to what's going on, of course you can have the stream on your other monitor, kind of keep tabs on where the other team is. They'll know that they have a pretty solid 1 minute or so advantage on the other team, including those death timers. So all they really need to do is play safe here, play clean, play like they've practiced, and they'll pretty much win the dungeon outright. There's not really a whole lot that Sheesh can do at this point outside of doing some giant gigapole that has a huge chance of failure to catch up.
Well,
and they're doing just that, I feel like. Team Name isn't pulling trash on top of the boss here.
Yeah, I mean, and Sheesh, the thing about Sheesh, right, is that they had more count earlier, so they didn't have to do that middle island pull after the second boss that Team Name did have to do. So Sheesh are going to be making their way into Domina Venomblade's room right around the same time that Team Name are pulling the boss. Now, I don't think we've seen any teams actually pull all of this trash onto Domina. It is an extremely scary thing to do. But if Sheesh were somehow able to make that happen, oh my goodness gracious, look at that. Domina Venomblade is walking over. They know what they have to do to try and make this thing happen.
Oh
look
boy.
at all those explosives spawning. The Spiderlings too. Wildly with a great Dragon's Breath over onto those. Splat is going to soul shape out of the raid to get hit by that stun outside of the whole group. Get back into the rest of the now. No!
Oh, Thaner,
the
no!
damage. Oh no!
They'll have a second battle res up in the next 15 seconds. They have to get Thaner alive. They'll be able to res Nezro in the next 10 seconds here, but they have to finish off this trash. It's all on Splat right now. Wildy's damage is gone, but with a second death from Thaner, it's going to be all she wrote. That's going to be another full team wipe for Sheesh here, and all eyes are on Team Name now, is they have Dominant Venom Blade down below 50%, trucking along as usual. That's just a heartbreaker. Sheesh knew what they had to do to come back in the dungeon, and they just weren't able to pull it off.
Yeah, my belief is that was not their plan when this dungeon started, to pull all that trash with Dominant Venom Blade. My belief is that that was a improvisation, right? An audible that they called as a result of being this far behind. And I think in that context, it was a fantastic move. It was a low success rate play, but it's exactly the only way they had a chance of still winning this map in their own hands, right? The only thing that didn't rely on just Team Name, feeding to a boss. And so, even though it didn't work out for them this time, I think it was a fantastic, fantastic call. And that is exactly the kind of thing they're going to need to continue pulling out if they want to win the MDI, right? That's the kind of winner's move and mindset that you need, is figure out what you can do to win the game. And even when it's not realistic, you keep going for it. You keep trying to make it happen. But yeah, like you said, all eyes now on Team Name as Team Name are making their way into the final boss room. Once they get this last trash done, and once they kill that last boss, the timer will stop, and Sheesh are now light years behind.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally all eyes on Team Name right now. Sheesh has to wait for whatever cooldowns they need to skip past this trash, whether it's in Vizpots or anything, or just getting back their gusto to try to pull some trash here. It's a little unfortunate to wipe that way, but again, definitely a big veteran MDI play call, even though they aren't really veterans of the MDI at all, to go for that, knowing that was their only chance of taking this game and keeping the series going. I would have loved to see them pull it off so we would have a close match at the last boss, but unfortunately, not meant to be.
Okay, and look, Sheesh are actually going to have to come up with another way to skip that middle pack because their invis and stuff aren't available, so they had Andy just pull to the side and die. That's what they're going to do to attempt to recover here, but yeah, they need multiple wipes to go in their favor at this point as Team Name are working on the final little bits of trash. Once they can kill off Iker Bileflesh here, they will spawn the last boss, and that will mean that they can get started with it. And let's take a look at the count here. I think their count is good. I think once all of these mobs die, they should be hitting 100%. That is going to be the important thing to see, though. 94. Oh, maybe not quite. Oh, yeah, once Iker died, because Iker is still in there, yeah. There they go. They're going to hit 100% with 12 minutes and 20 seconds on the clock as they are now getting started with the last boss.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, they're not going for it again. At this point, they're pretty much only hoping for a Team Name wipe, right? There's not really a whole lot that they can do.
Yeah, there they go. Malignant Spawn is going to deal a lot of damage to Lepan, but he is just fine in that Fraught Warrior cooldown. He is vibing out as they make their way very quickly into that intermission phase. This is a boss where on a 19 fortified level, I mean, that is the lowest amount of health that bosses can have in our tournament, right? 19 is the lowest key level we're doing, and fortified rather than tyrannical. So they should be able to push the phases on this boss fairly quickly and avoid getting into long phases with those many stacks of Infectious Rain, just kind of grinding them down. So even with that healing reduction, offense is their best defense here, right? Pushing the boss faster than it can push them.
Yeah, and again, they have plenty of immunities and defensives to live through 1 or 2 Infectious Rains, so I'm not too worried about them living through that. It should be pretty easy for them, especially like
look at that.
Just mentioned, we're on the lowest key level. They're not even getting the full channel off in a phase. It's just easy peasy for them. I mean, this isn't anywhere near as fast as the run from Perplex was yesterday, but it didn't need to be, right? They knew they were ahead. They probably could have gone for some bigger pulls, like, again, pulling maybe 1 trash pack on top of Domina, but yeah, they didn't have to at all.
Yeah, I mean, both teams made the correct plays in my estimation, right? Team Name was just playing safe to stay ahead. Sheesh was playing aggressively and risky to try and catch up. It didn't work out for them. That first pull really did end up sealing their fate this dungeon, but they did everything in their power to try and claw it back. It will not be enough, though. Team Name are going to take this series 2-0 and advance to the upper finals against Perplexed tomorrow. Sheesh not out of it yet, though. They are being sent down to the lower bracket where they will continue to fight for their tournament life.
That's right. Team Name taking